In the far corner of the galaxy, there was a shining empire made of tall silver towers and glowing crystal cities. It was a place of power and wealth, where many alien worlds bowed in respect. But inside this empire, there was a secret that no one spoke about loudly, a secret hidden behind golden walls and dark curtains. Her name was Princess Leora. She was the youngest daughter of the royal family, and she was born without sight. Her eyes looked pale and distant, and the court whispered that she was cursed. From the moment of her birth, the royal council declared she was unfit to rule. They said a blind princess had no value, no strength and no purpose, so they locked her away, far from the great halls where music and laughter filled the nights. She lived in a quiet chamber, with only a few servants who pitied her. Nobles refused to speak her name, and suitors from across the stars ignored her completely. No one wants a blind princess, the whispers echoed through the marble corridors. No warrior will fight for her, no leader will marry her, no kingdom will honor her, but still, she was alive and no one dared to kill her. Why? Because of the old prophecy. The priests once spoke of a child born with no sight, who would see beyond all darkness. They said she would rise in the time of great danger, and her hand would decide the fate of the empire. Many laughed at the prophecy, but fear kept the rulers from casting her away. So the princess lived, forgotten but never fully erased. Leora grew in silence, but her silence was not empty. Even without eyes, she felt the world in ways others could not. She heard the heartbeat of servants as they entered her room. She sensed the warmth of sunlight even through heavy curtains. She felt the tremble of the ground when the giant starships passed over the palace roof, and when people lied, she could feel the sharp edge in their voices. It was as if her blindness had opened another vision, one deeper than sight, yet no one asked her what she felt. No one believed she had anything to offer, so she remained in the shadows, waiting, listening, learning. Every year, the Empire celebrated the Festival of Stars. Leaders from across the galaxy came with their fleets and their gifts. It was a time of great alliances and promises, and every year the princess was hidden away, so no one would see her. The court feared that showing her weakness would bring shame to the throne. But this year was different. This year, something in the air was heavy, strange and unsettled. Rumors spread that enemies were moving in the dark. Whispers of war carried through the halls. The emperor wanted to show the strength of his house, and so he ordered every royal child to stand before the guests. That included Princess Leora for the first time. The blind princess would be brought out of her chamber, into the open eyes of the galaxy. The servants dressed her in silver cloth and placed a crown of crystal on her head. She looked fragile, pale, almost like a ghost. The courtiers sneered behind their hands. She is a shadow, a broken jewel, they said. She will bring us nothing but shame. But Leora said nothing. She walked slowly, guided by her quiet senses. Each step she took echoed in the golden hall. Though blind, her head was held high, her face calm, her movement steady. The crowd laughed, but a strange silence followed. Some felt uneasy, as if she carried something unseen. Far above on the balcony, the emperor's eyes were cold. To him, she was only a reminder of weakness, but to the galaxy below, she was now revealed. The forgotten princess was no longer hidden, and in that moment, destiny began to turn. No one wanted the blind alien princess, but fate had already chosen her path, and soon, someone unexpected would step forward, changing everything. The Festival of Stars began with thunderous music that shook the skies. Ships from hundreds of worlds circled the Empire's capital. Glowing like fireflies in the night, the great palace gates opened wide, and endless lines of guests in strange clothes entered the golden halls. Alien kings with jeweled crowns, warriors with blades burning in blue fire, merchants with their treasure caravans all came to bow before the emperor. For the Empire, this was not only a celebration but a test of power. Every eye watched to see which ruler was strong, which alliance was weak, and which world would rise or fall. It was a festival of beauty, but under the beauty lived danger. Whispers of betrayal ran through the air like cold wind. Some spoke of rebels in the outer systems, others of secret enemies gathering in the dark. And in the center of this storm stood the forgotten princess. Princess Leora was brought forward to stand with her royal brothers and sisters. The hall blazed with crystal light. Banners of 1,000 worlds hung above. The crowd gasped when they saw her. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others laughed quietly. Blind, they whispered. A princess who cannot see how shameful, how weak, The royal children shifted uncomfortably, not wishing to be near her. Even her own father, the emperor, barely glanced in her direction, but Leora stood still, her head raised, her silver gown catching the light. She did not see the crowd's cruel stares, but she felt the heavy wave of their judgment. To them, she was nothing but a mistake dressed in jewels. Yet deep inside she sensed something else. The hall felt uneasy, restless, as if shadows moved behind the walls. Her hidden sight told her that the festival was not only about pride, it was about danger. The guests feasted on glowing fruits and drank wine that burned like fire. Dancers spun in circles. Musicians filled the air with deep metal drums. But behind the laughter, alliances were being formed. Threats were being whispered. One alien warlord offered the emperor a gift, a beast with teeth of steel. Chained and snarling, another offered rare crystals said to hold the power of stars. But when it came to Leora, no one offered anything. They looked at her as if she were invisible, a blemish upon the royal stage, and yet there was one who watched her closely, a human traveler, unknown to most, standing at the edge of the hall. He had no crown, no wealth, no army, but his eyes never left the blind princess. Where others saw weakness, he saw something strange. He noticed how she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to things beyond sound, how she moved not with fear but with quiet certainty. He whispered to himself, "She is not broken. She is different." The festival continued. But beneath its shining surface, cracks began to appear. A great chandelier of crystal flickered and almost fell. A servant carrying golden plates stumbled as if pushed by unseen hands. Strange whispers echoed in corners where no one stood. Some guests laughed nervously, others muttered of curses, and their eyes turned once more toward the blind princess. "She brings misfortune," they said. She should never have been shown. The emperor grew angry, but he hid his fury behind a smile. He ordered the musicians to play louder, the dancers to spin faster, but the unease did not fade. The blind princess sensed it clearly, an invisible thread of danger pulling tighter and tighter. It was as if something dark was waiting, watching, ready to strike. Leora's hands trembled slightly, but her face remained calm. She whispered to herself words no one could hear. "I see you hidden in the dark." Though her eyes were blind, her inner vision burned brighter than ever, and still the human traveler watched her. He saw the slight movement of her lips, the stillness in her body. He felt a chill, as if the blind princess knew something that no one else could. For a moment, his gaze met hers across the crowded hall. Though she could not see him, it felt as if she looked directly into his soul. And in that silent connection, the story of the forgotten princess began to change. The Festival of Stars was meant to show glory and power, but instead it became the stage for something far more dangerous. No one knew it yet, but that night the fate of the empire had already begun to shift, and in the shadows of the hall the first spark of destiny glowed faintly, waiting for the moment it would blaze into fire. The music of the festival thundered through the palace, yet in the far corner of the hall stood a man who did not belong. He was not dressed in jewels, nor did he wear armor of gold. He was a traveler, a stranger, a human from a distant star. Most ignored him, for humans were seen as weak, unimportant, a race with little history among the great empires. But this human stood calm, his dark eyes studying every detail, his silence sharper than the laughter around him. His name was Kalen, though few in the hall cared to ask. He carried no title, no treasure, no banners to show his worth. Yet there was a weight in his stance, a quiet strength that made him different from the noisy nobles and proud warriors. He saw the crystal light dancing on the walls, the blades at the guards' sides, the cold mask on the emperor's face. But most of all, he saw the blind princess. Leora stood with her siblings, pale and silent. Her sightless eyes turned to the crowd. Where others looked at her with pity or scorn, Kalen watched with curiosity. He noticed how she tilted her head as if listening to threads of sound others could not hear. He noticed how she shifted her hand slightly, tracing patterns in the air. And when the hall erupted in laughter at some cruel jest about her blindness, Kalen saw no shame in her face, only calm stillness. To him, she was not broken. She was something else, something hidden. Whispers flowed through the festival like poison. Merchants spoke of trade wars, warriors of blood oaths, spies of secret betrayals. Kalen listened, but his eyes always returned to Leora. Others thought she was useless, but he saw that she felt the weight of every word, every lie, every shadow. It was as if she could see deeper than all of them. Even without eyes, when the first strange event happened, Kaelin was the only one who did not laugh. A crystal torch along the wall burned suddenly black as if swallowed by darkness. Guests gasped, priests hurried to relight it, and nobles muttered of bad omens. The Emperor waved it away with a forced smile, but Kaelin noticed how Leora's head turned sharply toward the darkened torch. Her lips moved in a whisper, too soft for others to hear, and Kaelin thought. She knew this would happen. Later, when dancers spun across the marble floor, one slipped as if struck by an invisible hand. Gasps filled the air, cups of wine spilled. Music stumbled to silence. Again, the Emperor forced laughter. But Kaelin saw Leora grip the edge of her gown tightly. Her blind eyes lifted to the ceiling. As if searching beyond the sight of everyone else, Kaelin's chest tightened. For he understood she was not afraid, she was aware. Something unseen was moving in this hall, and she alone could feel it as the night deepened. Kaelin moved closer to the royal dais. The guards frowned, their hands on their weapons, but he slipped into the crowd unnoticed. He stood where he could see her clearly, where he could hear the soft rhythm of her breath. At that moment, her face turned slightly in his direction. Though she could not see, Kaelin felt her attention fall upon him like a blade. It was as if she reached across the crowded hall and found him in the sea of strangers. Their connection lasted only a heartbeat, but it shook him. He had seen rulers, generals, kings, but none had ever looked at him the way this blind princess did. Not with eyes, but with something deeper. And Kaelin, a simple traveler, felt as though he had been chosen, though he did not yet know for what. The festival carried on with wine and songs, but Kaelin could no longer hear them. His thoughts were locked on her, the forgotten princess. He remembered stories told in the far colonies, old whispers of a prophecy about a child born without sight who would save a kingdom in darkness. He had never believed such tales, but now, standing before her, he felt the weight of those old words pressing against his heart. As the final songs began to fade, Kaelin made a choice. He would not leave the festival as a silent guest. He would not turn away like the rest of them. He would stay close to the blind princess, even if it meant walking into danger, for in her silence, he heard the first echoes of a storm that would change the galaxy. The human outsider had stepped into the circle of fate, and though none yet noticed, the Empire's destiny had just begun to shift. The Festival of Stars should have been a night of light, yet shadows stretched longer with each passing hour. The palace glowed with silver fire, banners rippled high above, and music thundered through the halls, but beneath the laughter, something unseen stirred, something dangerous. Princess Leora stood among her brothers and sisters, her pale eyes unblinking. To the crowd she looked fragile, useless, a figure of pity. But within her silence she felt the tremble of the air, the pulse of hidden movements. She could sense the festival was no celebration. It was a stage for something far darker. Kaelin, the human outsider, watched from the edge of the hall. He had traveled across countless stars, seen strange worlds, fought dangers that others feared. Yet here in this glowing palace he felt more uneasy than in any battlefield. His gaze never left the blind princess, for he knew she felt what others ignored. The first true sign of danger came when the crystal lights dimmed without warning. One by one, flames flickered weakly as if choking on invisible smoke. Gasps filled the room. Guards rushed forward. Priests muttered hurried chants. The Emperor forced a smile, waving the crowd back to calm. But Kaelin saw Leora's head tilt sharply, her blind gaze fixed on the shadows above. Her lips moved, whispering words no one else could hear. Moments later, a scream cut through the music. A servant collapsed, plates of glowing fruit shattering across the marble floor. Guests drew back in horror, some muttered of poison, others of curses, and once again eyes turned toward the blind princess. "She is the omen," they hissed. "Her curse poisons us." But Leora stood calm. Her hands clenched tight. She knew the truth. It was not her, but something moving in the dark corners of the hall. Kaelin pushed through the crowd, moving closer. He ignored the suspicious stares, the murmurs of nobles who saw him as an intruder. His instincts screamed that danger was close, and only she seemed aware of it. He reached the base of the royal dais. Just as the music resumed in false cheer, the guards blocked his path. But he did not leave. Instead, he stayed within reach. His eyes sharp, his body ready, the festival pressed on. Yet unease thickened like smoke. Whispers carried through the hall, alliances breaking, rebels rising, traitors moving in silence, and above it all, the blind princess stood like a statue carved from shadow. To most she was forgotten, unwanted, an object of shame, but Kaelin felt she was the center, the silent eye of a storm yet to come. Then came the final omen. As the Emperor raised his cup to toast the unity of the Empire, a sudden crack split the hall. The grand chandelier of crystal swayed violently, chains snapping one by one. Gasps turned to screams as shards rained down. Nobles ran for cover. Guards rushed to shield the Emperor. But Kaelin's eyes went not to the falling crystal but to the princess, for she had moved before the first chain had broken. Her blind eyes lifted, her lips whispering, her hand reaching as if to warn unseen forces. The chandelier crashed, splintering marble and shattering tables. Chaos roared through the hall. Wine and blood spilled together. When the dust cleared, the Emperor stood unharmed. The guards shaken but alive, yet suspicion spread like fire. Every eye turned once more to Leora, their whispers sharp and cruel. She cursed this night, they said. Her blindness brings ruin. The Emperor's gaze fell on his daughter. Cold and merciless, he raised his hand as if ready to condemn her before the galaxy. But before he could speak, Kaelin stepped forward. The human's voice cut through the crowd. Firm and steady, it is not her, he said. Something else walks in your shadows. The hall fell silent, shocked that a mere human dared speak. But Kaelin did not falter. His hand rested near the weapon at his side, his eyes fixed on the Emperor. Leora's head turned toward him, her pale eyes soft yet unshaken. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken for her. Someone had seen that she was not a curse but a warning. The Emperor hesitated, his pride warring with the unease crawling through his hall. He lowered his hand, but his glare remained. "Watch your tongue, outsider," he growled. "This is not your world." But Kaelin only bowed slightly, his voice calm. "Perhaps not. But danger does not care which world it strikes." Leora stood silent, yet within her chest a spark burned brighter. The human had seen her truth, even if the galaxy refused to, and in that moment, the bond between them grew not of words, but of shared defiance against the shadows. The festival ended in false laughter, yet no one forgot the fear that gripped them. The chandelier lay shattered, the whispers of curses grew, and the nobles eyed the blind princess with contempt. But far above, hidden in the dark, something unseen stirred, watching, waiting. The night of shadows had only begun, and the blind princess, once forgotten, now stood at the edge of destiny. The palace had quieted after the chaos of the falling chandelier, but the silence was heavy. Servants cleaned broken crystal from the marble floor, while guests whispered nervously in the corners. The Emperor sat on his throne, his face carved in stone, pretending all was well. But fear had entered the golden hall, and fear never left without leaving scars. Princess Leora remained calm. Though her pale eyes saw nothing, her siblings avoided her, stepping away as if she carried poison in her hands. The nobles muttered darkly, their suspicion sharp as blades. "She brings ruin," they said. "She is the shadow of death." But the truth was different, and one man had begun to see it. Kaelin, the human outsider, waited until the crowd thinned. He moved through the side passages of the palace, guided by instinct and by something else, her presence. He found her in a quiet garden beyond the crystal halls, where silver leaves shimmered under the twin moons. She sat alone on a stone bench, her hands resting gently on her lap. Her head turned toward the stars she could not see. For a long moment he only watched. She looked fragile, like glass that could break with a touch. Yet there was strength in her stillness. Finally he stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. "You are not cursed," he said quietly, his voice steady. "You are more aware than anyone in that hall." Leora tilted her head, her blind eyes turning toward him. "You are the only one who dares to speak," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with weight. "They all fear me, but you do not." Kaelin sat across from her, his gaze locked on her face. "They see blindness," he said. "I see something else." Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile, but not quite. Then she lowered her voice, leaning closer. "I will tell you what they refuse to hear," she said. "My eyes cannot see, but I was born with another gift." She raised her hands, letting her fingers hover in the air as if tracing invisible lines. "I feel the movement of life around me," she continued. "I hear the tremor of lies. I sense the weight of fear. I can touch the shadows where others are blind." Her pale eyes gleamed faintly in the moonlight, and Kaelin felt a shiver crawl up his spine. This was no curse, this was power. Power the court feared, power the Empire hid. The chandelier, Kaelin said slowly. You knew it would fall. Leora nodded, her face solemn. I felt the chains straining before they broke. I felt the hand that loosened them. Though no one else noticed, her voice tightened. Something dark has entered the palace, something hidden in plain sight. Kaelin clenched his fists, anger burning in his chest. They blame you for their own blindness, he said. But you are the only one who can see the truth. Leora's lips trembled, not in fear, but in pain. For years, I have tried to warn them, but they laugh, they hide me. They call me broken. Her voice softened to a whisper. Perhaps I was meant to be silent forever. No, Kaelin said firmly, his voice cutting through the night air. You were meant for more. His words carried no doubt, no hesitation, and for the first time in her life, Leora believed them. The garden grew still, the silver leaves whispering softly in the wind. Kaelin leaned closer, his eyes sharp. Tell me, he asked, what did you sense tonight? Beyond the falling crystal? Leora's breath slowed, her fingers brushing against the stone bench. There were shadows, she said, moving where no shadows should be, whispers without mouths, steps without feet. Her head turned slightly, as if she could still hear them even now. They were searching for something. Or someone. Kaelin's chest tightened, his instincts screaming that the danger was real. If the princess's gift was true, and he no longer doubted it, then the Empire was already under attack. Not from the blind girl, but from an enemy hidden within their walls. You cannot face this alone, he said, his tone heavy with resolve. You need someone who will believe you, someone who will stand at your side. Leora's lips parted in surprise. No one has ever spoken those words to me, she whispered. Kaelin gave a faint smile. Then let me be the first. The night deepened, the garden wrapped in silence, and though no vow was spoken, a bond was forged. The human outsider had chosen the blind princess, and the blind princess, long forgotten, had revealed her hidden gift. Neither knew how far this path would lead. Neither knew the storm that was rising, but both understood one thing. The shadows were no longer far away. They were already here, watching, waiting, and together, they would have to face them. The next day, the Festival of Stars returned with brighter lights and louder songs. The Emperor ordered the halls to be filled with laughter, as if broken crystal and spilled blood had never touched the floor. Nobles raised their cups, dancers spun, and merchants spoke of riches, but beneath the golden show, fear still lingered like smoke. Princess Leora stood silently among the royal line, her blind eyes pale and unblinking. She felt the pulse of unease in the crowd, the sharp edge of whispers that never reached the surface. The shadows had not left with the night, they were closer now, hungrier, and though her heart beat fast, her face remained calm. For she knew that something was about to break. Kaelin, the human outsider, kept near her, never straying far. He was ignored by most, dismissed as a traveler of no importance, but his watchful eyes missed nothing, and his hand never left the hilt of his blade. He trusted the princess's warnings, and his instincts told him she was right. Danger was here, hidden in plain sight. It began with a single gesture so small that few noticed. One of the royal nobles, Lord Sarath, stepped forward to present his gift to the Emperor. He was tall, draped in crimson silk, his smile sharp as a dagger. He bowed deeply, offering a chest carved with silver. Inside, jewels glittered like stars, bright enough to dazzle the hall. The Emperor praised him, the nobles clapped politely. But Leora's head turned sharply, her blind eyes fixed on Sarath. She felt the tremor of deceit rolling off him like poison. Sarath's voice was smooth as honey, but beneath it beat the rhythm of betrayal. Leora whispered under her breath, so soft that only Kaelin, standing close, could hear. He is not loyal, she said. He is the shadow I felt. Kaelin's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing on the noble. But before he could speak, Sarath's men moved. Hidden among the servants, disguised as dancers and guards, they struck, blades flashed, smoke filled the air, and the festival turned to chaos in a heartbeat. Guests screamed, nobles fled, and the Emperor shouted in fury. The betrayal had begun. Sarath's voice rose above the noise, cold and sharp. The Empire is weak, he cried. Its throne unworthy, its bloodline broken. He pointed at Leora, his eyes burning with hatred. And this blind child is proof of its decay, the crowd gasped, their fear turning into confusion. Some believed his words, others shook their heads in denial, But before any could act, Serath's soldiers raised their weapons. The betrayal was complete and the palace was now a battlefield. Kalen moved instantly, his blade flashing in the smoke. He cut down the first assassin before it could reach the princess. "Stay close to me," he shouted, his voice steady even as chaos erupted. Leora stood firm, her hands clenched, her face calm. She could hear every step, every movement, every hidden strike. "Left," she whispered, and Kalen turned just in time to block a dagger aimed at his throat. The two moved as one, human skill and alien sense. Where Kalen's eyes could not see, Leora's hidden vision guided him. Again and again she whispered, "Behind you, above you, to the right," and his blade struck true, cutting down shadow after shadow. The human and the blind princess fought like they had trained together all their lives. The nobles cowered in fear, hiding behind pillars and overturned tables. The emperor roared in rage, calling his guards to crush the rebels. But many guards hesitated, their loyalty uncertain. Some fled, some fought, and some joined Serath's side. The betrayal was deeper than anyone had imagined. Through the smoke, Serath's voice rang clear. "Kill the emperor, take the throne, burn the old prophecy," he shouted. "And end this empire of lies." His soldiers surged forward, blades raised high, but Kalen and Leora stood between them and their goal. The outsider and the outcast side by side. Kalen's blade flashed like fire, while Leora's voice guided him through the storm. The more they fought, the stronger their bond grew. And though the hall shook with screams and steel, neither wavered. Serath glared at them, fury burning in his eyes. He had expected an easy victory, but instead he faced resistance he could not break. "Why do you protect her?" he shouted, pointing at Leora. "She is nothing, a blind curse. A useless shadow." Kalen's eyes blazed, his voice sharp as steel. "She sees more than you ever will." For a moment, the hall went silent, as if the words themselves carried power. Even the rebels faltered, shaken by the strength in the human's voice. And in that silence, Leora stood taller, her presence no longer weak. She was no longer just the forgotten princess. She was the heart of the storm. The battle raged on, but something had shifted. Serath's betrayal had revealed more than treachery. It had revealed the hidden gift of the princess. And though the night was filled with blood and fire, the first spark of hope had been lit. A human and a blind alien princess, standing together, had turned betrayal into defiance, and the galaxy would never forget what began that night. The palace had become a battlefield, its golden halls filled with smoke and screams. Flames licked the banners of 1,000 worlds. While shattered crystal crunched beneath fleeing feet, the emperor shouted commands. But his voice was drowned by the clash of steel and the roar of traitors. The festival of stars had turned into a night of blood. Princess Leora stood with Kalen at the heart of the storm. Her blind eyes glowed faintly in the firelight, her calm face unshaken. Kalen's blade flashed as he cut down another rebel, his breath heavy, his stance steady. But without her whispers, he knew he would already be dead. "Behind you," Leora said, her voice sharp and clear. Kalen spun, striking down an assassin who crept from the shadows. "To your left," she warned, and his sword met steel before it touched his flesh. Together they moved like one body, human strength guided by alien sight. The rebels pushed harder, their blades dripping with fury. Serath's voice rose above the chaos, cold and merciless. "Kill them both," he roared. "Kill the human! Kill the cursed child!" His soldiers obeyed, rushing in waves, their eyes burning with fanatic fire. But Kalen did not fall. Every strike he made was guided by her words. Every step he took led by her unseen vision. And though the hall shook with violence, a strange rhythm bound them. The outsider and the blind princess stood unbroken. The nobles cowered behind pillars, their jeweled robes stained with blood. Some prayed, others cursed, but none dared to fight. Only the emperor's loyal guards tried to hold the line. Though many were already dead, it was Kalen and Leora who held the true defense. At the far end of the hall, Serath stepped forward, his crimson robe flowing like blood. He drew a blade of black steel, its edge glowing faintly with unnatural fire. His eyes blazed with hatred, his smile sharp and cruel. "This ends now," he hissed, his voice echoing across the shattered hall. Kalen stepped forward, his own blade raised, but before he moved, Leora placed her hand gently on his arm. "Wait," she whispered, her voice steady. "There is more here than steel and fire." She tilted her head, listening to something no one else could hear. Her face grew pale, her lips trembling with words she dared not speak. Then she said softly, "He is not alone." And as if to prove her right, shadows began to rise from the corners of the hall. Shapes without form slipped across the marble floor, their bodies like smoke, their eyes burning with cold light. The crowd screamed. The emperor froze. The guards fell back in terror. Dark beings had entered the hall, creatures not of flesh but of void. Serath laughed, his voice thick with triumph. "You see, blind child, you were right," he sneered, "but you were too late. The darkness already serves me." Leora's breath caught, yet she stood firm. Her gift allowed her to feel the creatures more clearly than any sighted eye. They pulsed with hunger, their movements sharp and cruel. "They are not his servants," she whispered. "He is their pawn." Kalen tightened his grip on his blade, his heart pounding. The fight was no longer just against rebels, but against a darkness that could swallow worlds. He looked at Leora, and she nodded once, calm and sure. "We must face them together," she said. The battle raged anew, shadows striking like whips, claws slashing through stone and steel. Kalen's blade passed through smoke, but with her voice guiding him, his strikes found the core of each creature. Where her gift sensed weakness, his steel delivered death. Again and again they moved as one, their bond unshakable in the storm. The rebels fell into panic as the void creatures turned even against them. Serath screamed in rage, swinging his black blade wildly. But the creatures cared nothing for loyalty, nothing for promises. They devoured all who stood near. Their hunger endless, Leora's voice rose above the chaos, strong and clear. "Kalen, the heart of the shadow is bound to him," she cried, pointing toward Serath. "If he falls, their hold breaks." Kalen did not hesitate. He charged through fire and fear, his sword clashing against Serath's cursed blade. Steel met steel, sparks lit the hall, and their struggle shook the ground. Serath fought with fury, his strikes fueled by hate and pride. But Kalen fought with something stronger. He fought with trust in the princess who guided him. "Right," she called, and his blade blocked a strike. "Down," she cried, and his sword cut low, driving Serath back step by step. Guided by her unseen eyes, Kalen pressed forward, until at last, with a roar, his blade pierced Serath's chest. The noble gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. "No," he whispered, "I was chosen." But the shadows that had clung to him tore free, shrieking as they dissolved into smoke. The hall fell silent as his body collapsed, his black blade clattering against the marble. The void creatures scattered like ash in the wind, their power broken. The rebels fled, their courage shattered, and for the first time that night, hope returned to the Golden Hall. Kalen stood gasping, his blade dripping with dark blood. Leora stepped forward, her hand reaching out. Though her eyes were blind, her voice was strong. "You see," she said softly, "together, we are more than they ever believed." The emperor stared in shock. The nobles trembled. None could deny what they had seen. The blind princess had guided the battle, and a human outsider had struck the blow that saved the empire. The future was no longer in the hands of kings and traitors. It was now bound to the courage of two souls.